There's a moment almost no one talks about. It starts quietly. They just watch, and in that watching, something begins to form. Something about me doesn't fit. At first, it feels temporary, like a pause that will pass. Weeks, and then years. It stops being an experience, and starts becoming an identity. And if you've ever felt that, even once, you'd already understand how loud silence can be when it carries rejection. Exclusion doesn't just stay on playgrounds. Into classrooms, into familias, into workplaces, and all the way into adulthood. Here is the part most people don't realize. This means being left out doesn't just hurt emotionally. For a child still learning what the world means, exclusion doesn't say, "This moment is painful." It says, "This is who you are." And once that message settles in, the nervous system adapts. The child becomes alert, hyperaware. They scan faces. They track tone. They noticed every little shift in energy. It meant starvation, exposure, or even death. So the brain built a powerful alarm system that never forgot. That's why the excluded child doesn't just feel sad. They feel threatened. Their body prepares for a fight or flight response before their mind even understands why. They start to hesitate before speaking. They pull back before they can be pushed away. They learn a quiet, subconscious rule. If I take up less space, I might be safer. And then they grow up. The playground becomes the office. The group of kids becomes society, and that old fear becomes internal. They might become successful. They might even be surrounded by people, but deep inside, the same question whispers. How long until I don't belong again? Here's the real irony. That fear often shapes behaviors that make connection even harder. They overthink conversations. They hide parts of themselves they think are unacceptable. They stay guarded to protect themselves, and without realizing it, they end up recreating the very distance they fear the most. But exclusion doesn't just shape the person who is excluded. It also shapes the ones doing the excluding. Groups often form their identity by contrast. We are us because you are not. Sometimes it isn't about intentional cruelty. It's an unconscious way of setting boundaries. Psychologists call it in-group and out-group behavior. It starts in childhood games and echoes all the way up to politics and culture. And here's where the damage gets even deeper. The excluded child doesn't usually conclude they were unkind. Te conclude, I am unworthy. This is the most dangerous turn of all. Because when exclusion becomes personal, it hardens into their self-concept. Years later, that same person hesitates to apply for the job, to speak up in a meeting, or to share their creative ideas. Not because they can't, but because some part of them still believes they are the outsider. One playground experience becomes a lifetime of hesitation. And yet, there is a paradox hiding in all of this. Many of the most deeply perceptive, creative, and empathetic adults were once excluded children. Why is that? Because standing on the outside teaches you how to see. You notice the patterns in human behavior. You learn to read group dynamics. You sense the things that people in the middle of the crowd miss entirely. Pain, when it's reflected on, can become perception. Now, this doesn't make exclusion a good thing. It leaves scars, absolutely. But sometimes, those scars become maps. Some of the most meaningful art, philosophy, and insight in history have come from people who once stood at the edge of the circle, looking in. Healing, though, doesn't happen automatically. It starts with a crucial mental separation. The fact is, you were excluded. But you are not exclusion itself. That simple distinction can change everything. Collectively, this forces us to ask a harder question. Who are we overlooking without even noticing? Whose voices go unheard simply because their silence has become normal to us? Inclusion isn't just about being kind. It's about unlocking power. Over time, these patterns wire a belief deep into the brain. I don't belong. But the brain is not fixed, and identity is not permanent. Neuroscience shows us that new relationships, new experiences, and new personal narratives can actually rewire those old, painful patterns. The excluded child that lives inside of you can learn something new. They can learn that their exclusion was never proof of their unworthiness. It was only proof of human limitation, of fear, and of unconscious bias. Nearly everyone has been that child at some point in their life. Realizing this can shift the entire perspective. The wall was never really between you and the rest of humanity. It was a wall built from fear. So the question becomes simple, but not easy. What happens when we stop repeating the patterns of exclusion and start actively interrupting them? Inclusion changes lives. Not always dramatically, but quietly and permanently. The excluded child isn't a symbol of weakness. They are a mirror of the human condition itself. Every person, in every culture, asks the same fundamental question. Where do I belong? The deepest healing comes when we realize that belonging isn't something we have to earn from others. It's something we learn to offer. It can end in connection. It can end in the simple, radical truth that we all need to hear. You belong.